I still remember the sound of the wind that day, cold, sharp, and heartless. Thomas's hand slipped from mine as we tumbled down the rocky slope, the earth spinning around us like a nightmare that refused to end. Above us stood our son, Matthew, our own flesh and blood. His face was pale, his eyes empty, watching us fall as if we were strangers. I wanted to scream his name, to ask why, to reach for the boy I once cradled in my arms. But Thomas's trembling hand gripped mine, and his voice, barely a whisper, cut through the chaos. He said, "Pretend we are dead. Do not move. Do not make a sound." And in that frozen silence, as the waves crashed below, I realized the child we raised with love had turned into something unrecognizable. Before I continue, please take a moment to subscribe to Grandma Fables. Stay with me until the end, because this story is not just about betrayal, but about survival, forgiveness, and the strength it takes to begin again. My name is Evelyn Hargrave, and I am 68 years old. For most of my life, I have lived in a quiet coastal town in Oregon, where the air smells of salt and pine, and the ocean hums like an old lullaby. My husband, Thomas, and I built our home there nearly 4 decades ago. A weathered white cottage perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. It was not grand, but it was filled with love. Every plank of wood, every window pane, every inch of that place held a piece of our story. Thomas was a craftsman, gentle, dependable, and wise. He worked with his hands, shaping beauty out of raw timber. There was a stillness in him that balanced my restless heart. He used to say, "If you treat people like they matter, they will always remember how you made them feel." Perhaps that was why our son Matthew grew up so kind. Or at least that was what I believed for most of my life. Matthew was our only child, the answer to 1,000 prayers whispered under the night sky. I remember the day he was born as vividly as if it were yesterday. A storm raged outside the hospital, thunder shaking the windows, and yet the moment I held him, the world seemed utterly still. His eyes were deep green, Thomas' eyes, and his tiny fingers curled around mine as if promising never to let go. From that day forward, he became the reason I breathed. I had grown up in a family where love was scarce and survival was all that mattered. My father had been a miner, my mother a laundress, both exhausted by the weight of living. I swore my child would never feel that emptiness. So I gave him everything: my time, my care, my dreams, and my peace. Thomas and I ran a small woodworking shop called Hargrave and Cumber Designs. We crafted tables, chairs, and cabinets for locals. The business was modest but respected. When times were hard, Thomas would take extra jobs repairing fishing boats, and I would stay up late balancing the accounts. It was not easy, but we had each other, and that was enough. At night, after Matthew was asleep, we would sit by the fireplace. Thomas would carve toys or bird figurines while I knitted scarves for the winter markets. The sound of the waves below our home mixed with the soft hum of his carving knife, and for years, I believed that sound was what happiness must feel like. Matthew was a bright boy, polite, eager, and full of curiosity. He used to follow Thomas to the workshop, asking questions about every tool, every piece of wood. By the time he was 12, he could carve better than most apprentices. When he left for college, I cried quietly after he boarded the bus. Thomas held me and whispered, "Let him see the world, Eve. He will come home wiser." And he did come back, taller, more confident, with city polish and sharp ambitions. He wanted to expand our business, open an online store, and bring in investors. I was proud of his drive. We gave him part ownership, let him make decisions, trusted his vision. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But slowly, something changed. He stopped joining us for Sunday dinners. His laughter grew rare, his calls shorter. He began to sound like a stranger living inside my son's voice. When I asked what was wrong, he would smile faintly and say, "Nothing, Mom. I just have a lot on my mind." A mother knows when that is not true. When Thomas died 10 years ago, the world lost its color for me. He passed quietly in his sleep, with the morning sun on his face. I remember pressing my forehead to his and whispering, "Wait for me." Matthew came home for the funeral, but his grief seemed distant, almost rehearsed. He stayed 2 days, then brought up money, the business, the assets, the future. "Mom," he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "you cannot handle this place alone anymore. You should think about selling it. It is too much work." I looked at him, still wearing his father's black tie, and felt my heart twist. "This was your father's dream, Matthew. It is his legacy." He shrugged. "Legacies are sentimental. You could live comfortably if you sold everything. Maybe move to a retirement community near Portland." I smiled faintly to hide my hurt, but that night I cried in the dark. That was the first time I felt afraid of the distance growing between us. Years passed. I managed the workshop with loyal workers who refused to leave after Thomas's death. They said they stayed because he had treated them like family. That loyalty became my lifeline. Still, the house grew quieter. Birthdays passed with only short phone calls. Christmases were spent alone, surrounded by the echoes of laughter that no longer existed. Until one day, the silence broke, with a voice that would change everything. "Mrs. Hargrave?" The woman's voice was soft and friendly, almost musical. "My name is Olivia Kent. I am Matthew's fiancée. He told me so much about you." Her tone carried warmth, and something about it made me want to believe her. She said she wanted to visit, to finally meet me. I could hardly contain my excitement. That evening, I set the table with care. White linens, crystal glasses, the old silverware Thomas's mother had given us. I roasted chicken, baked apple pie, and placed flowers from the garden in a vase at the center. When they arrived, Matthew looked radiant, and Olivia was even more beautiful than her voice suggested. Golden hair, bright blue eyes, and a smile that could melt stone. She called me Mrs. H, hugged me tightly, and said she already felt like part of the family. For the first time in years, I felt hope blooming again. Olivia seemed perfect. She laughed easily, praised everything about our home, and told me how much she admired my late husband's craftsmanship. She asked to see old photographs, listened to my stories, and called me Mom by the end of the week. I had never had a daughter, and she filled that space in my heart effortlessly. I gave her gifts, shared recipes, even gave her a sapphire brooch that once belonged to my grandmother. I wanted her to know she was welcome. But soon, small things began to unsettle me. I noticed the way she looked at the business accounts when Matthew was not around, the way her eyes lingered on the framed deed to our workshop hanging in the hall. Once I walked into the kitchen and found them whispering, their voices low and tense. When they saw me, they stopped abruptly. I tried to dismiss it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that love sometimes makes people secretive for good reasons. Until one night, while passing by the living room, I heard Olivia say something that made my blood run cold. "She will never agree to transfer the ownership, Matt. You will have to find another way." I froze in the hallway. The room was dimly lit, their silhouettes outlined by the firelight. Matthew replied, his voice low and heavy. "She is old, Liv. It will not take much. She trusts me." I stepped back quietly, my heart pounding in my chest. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the window, staring at the waves as they slammed against the rocks below. My mind raced between disbelief and fear. My son, the baby I once rocked to sleep, was plotting against me. Or maybe, just maybe, I was losing my mind. Days passed. I tried to act normal, to convince myself that I had misunderstood. When Matthew called me Mom, I still answered with love. When Olivia kissed my cheek, I still smiled. But beneath my calm exterior, dread grew like a shadow. The sea outside our home began to sound different. Not peaceful anymore, but warning, restless, endless. Sometimes when I looked at Matthew, I could almost see the child he used to be. The boy who built toy sailboats with his father, who laughed until tears ran down his cheeks. But that boy was gone. And as I lay awake one night, listening to the waves crashing against the cliffs, I realized something terrible. It was not just my son who was slipping away. It was my entire life. Sometimes the people you raise to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. The months that followed were strange, as if my life had slipped quietly into a dream that did not belong to me. Matthew and Olivia began visiting more often, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with smiles so wide they almost felt rehearsed. I wanted to believe that our bond was mending, that my fears had been foolish, that love still lived inside my son's heart. But there was something behind their kindness, something heavy, unspoken, and growing darker by the day. At first, it began with small requests. "Mom," Matthew said one afternoon as we sat in the garden, "Olivia and I are thinking of buying a small house near the city. Something modest, close to my work. We could use a little help with the down payment." I nodded slowly. "How much help do you need, dear?" "Nothing major," Olivia said quickly, placing her hand over mine. "Just a loan. You know we would pay it back." Her fingers were soft, but her grip was firm. Too firm. I agreed, of course. I wanted them to have a good start, to feel supported. I signed a check that evening and handed it to Matthew the next day. He kissed my cheek and called me the best mother in the world. But after that, something in his tone began to change. A few weeks later, Olivia started visiting the workshop under the pretense of helping with management. She carried a leather-bound planner and spoke with quiet authority to the employees, though she barely knew the business. One of the older workers, Jim Harper, pulled me aside one morning. "Mrs. Hargrave," he said carefully, "I mean no disrespect, but the young lady has been giving orders. She told us to send invoices directly to your son, said it was for efficiency." I thanked him, smiled, and told him not to worry, but inside, my stomach churned. When I confronted Matthew later that evening, he laughed. "Mom, Olivia is just trying to help. She is good with finances. Let her take some weight off your shoulders." I wanted to believe that. I truly did. But soon after, I noticed strange transactions appearing in the company accounts. Money moved between unfamiliar names, unexplained withdrawals, small but frequent. When I asked Matthew, he dismissed it. "Business expenses, Mom. Nothing to worry about." The tone he used was different, patronizing, almost mocking. Weeks turned into months. My once peaceful home began to feel like a stage, every conversation rehearsed, every gesture part of an act I could not escape. Olivia still smiled at me, still brought flowers, still called me Mom, but her eyes had grown cold. One night, as I cleared the dinner table, I overheard them arguing in the hallway. "You promised she would sign the papers by now," Olivia hissed. "I am working on it," Matthew snapped. "She is stubborn. She still thinks Dad's company means something." "Well, it does mean something, to me. You said the assets were ours once she steps down." My hands trembled and a plate slipped from my grip, shattering on the floor. The noise startled them. When I turned toward them, Olivia's expression shifted instantly into concern. "Oh, Mom, are you all right?" she said sweetly, rushing over. "You really should not be doing so much around the house." Matthew smiled faintly, but I could see his jaw tighten. That was the moment I knew. I was not losing my mind. They were planning something. I began to notice more. Documents missing from my desk. Letters from the accountant disappearing. Phone calls ending the moment I entered the room. One morning, I received a call from my bank about a joint account, one I had never opened. When I asked who had authorized it, the woman on the phone hesitated. "It lists a co-signer named Matthew Hargrave, ma'am. Your son." The room seemed to spin. I thanked her and hung up, my heart pounding. That evening, I asked him calmly about it. He did not flinch. "Mom, it is for your convenience," he said smoothly. "If something happens to you, I can handle the bills." I stared at him, unable to recognize the man sitting before me. His voice, his face. They belonged to my son, but his eyes were cold, like green glass. The tension grew heavier with each passing week. I began locking my office, hiding important papers in the attic, and keeping a small notebook of my own. Every suspicious withdrawal, every strange phone call, every whisper I overheard. At night, I would sit by the window and stare at the sea, trying to remember when my son's voice had last sounded kind. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Olivia arrived unannounced, carrying a casserole dish and her usual bright smile. "I thought you might like some company," she said. "Matthew is working late." We sat by the fire, and for a while I almost believed we were just two women sharing warmth, but then her words turned sharp, hidden beneath politeness. You really should think about slowing down, Evelyn. The business must be exhausting at your age. You deserve rest. Real rest. Her tone was calm, but her eyes flickered like a knife catching light. I smiled gently. I appreciate your concern, dear. But work gives me purpose. It keeps me going. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but edged. Purpose can become a burden if you are not careful. Sometimes letting go is the kindest thing you can do for everyone. I felt the air leave my chest. For the first time, I truly saw her. Not as a daughter-in-law, not as the woman my son loved, but as the shadow standing between me and everything I held dear. After that night, I could not rest. I felt watched. When I walked through the house, I sometimes found drawers opened that I was certain I had closed. One morning, I discovered muddy footprints near my study door, too large to be mine. Matthew denied everything. "Mom, you are imagining things," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You need to relax." That was when Olivia suggested something new, that I see a doctor. "You have been under stress, Evelyn," she said gently. "It is normal at your age to feel confused or paranoid. Maybe a checkup would help." Her words sliced through me like glass. Confused. Paranoid. That was when I understood their plan. They were not only after the company. They wanted to paint me as unstable, to take away my credibility, perhaps even my freedom. The next morning, I visited my lawyer, Mr. Alan Price, an old friend of Thomas's. He listened quietly as I told him everything: the missing papers, the whispers, the bank account, the pressure to retire. When I finished, he removed his glasses and sighed. "Evelyn, I have known you for 30 years. You are not imagining this. Whatever they are doing, it is deliberate. You must be careful." He advised me to safeguard all documents, update my will, and make no financial decisions without him present. I followed every instruction, but I did not tell Matthew. Not yet. Days later, Matthew came to visit. His smile was wide, too wide, and his tone too light. "Mom," he began, "Olivia and I have been talking. We want to take you on a little trip. Just a weekend getaway to relax. You need some fresh air." He spoke so gently that for a moment I almost believed it was genuine. Almost. Something deep inside me warned that this trip was not meant to bring peace. It was meant to bring something else entirely. I forced a smile. "That sounds lovely," I said. "The sea cliffs are beautiful this time of year." His eyes flickered for a moment, surprise, then relief. That week, I began preparing quietly. I made copies of every document, every bank statement, and placed them in a sealed envelope hidden in my wardrobe. I wrote a letter to Mr. Price explaining everything that had happened and arranged for it to be delivered if I did not return home. I was afraid, yes, but more than that, I was heartbroken. No mother ever believes her child could harm her. I had spent my life protecting Matthew from the cruelty of the world, never imagining I would one day need protection from him. The morning of the trip arrived. The sky was clear, the sea calm. Matthew helped me into the car, his voice cheerful, his hand steady. Olivia sat in the back seat, humming softly to herself. We drove for hours along winding coastal roads, the cliffs rising higher with each turn. I tried to convince myself that I was wrong, that my son would never hurt me, that this was just a misunderstanding, that love would win in the end. But deep down, something inside me whispered the truth. There are moments in life when the people we love become strangers, and once that happens, nothing can ever return to what it was. As we neared the cliffs, Matthew turned to me with that same practiced smile. "Almost there, Mom," he said softly. I looked out the window, the ocean stretching endlessly beneath us, the drop steep and merciless. My heart beat hard against my chest, and I felt the faintest tremor of fear crawl through my hands. I did not yet know what would happen next, not how he would push us, not how my husband's words would save our lives, but the darkness had already begun its descent, and I could feel it, because betrayal, like the tide, always rises quietly, until it pulls everything you love away. The road narrowed as we climbed higher into the coastal hills. Gray mist rolled in from the sea, curling like smoke across the cliffs, swallowing the world in silence. The sound of the waves crashing below grew faint, distant, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. Matthew drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually on the window. Olivia sat beside him, humming softly, an eerie tune that I did not recognize. I sat in the back seat, my fingers clenched around the small leather pouch that held my husband's pocket watch. I had taken it with me that morning without thinking. It was Thomas's watch, the one he had carried every day of his life, the one that had stopped ticking the moment he passed. For years I had kept it beside my bed, the last reminder of his steady presence. Now it felt heavier than ever, as though it carried a warning. We reached the top of the hill, where the road ended in a flat stretch of gravel. Before us, the sea opened wide, vast, silver, and endless. The wind screamed across the cliffs, pulling at my scarf. Matthew parked the car near the edge and turned off the engine. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the wind moved, whispering against the car doors. Then he smiled. "Beautiful, is it not?" I nodded faintly. "It is." Olivia stepped out first, wrapping her coat tighter. "The view is breathtaking," she said, her voice bright, almost cheerful. I followed slowly, my feet crunching against the gravel. The air smelled of salt and cold iron. Far below, the waves struck the rocks in white bursts of fury. Matthew joined us, his expression unreadable. For several minutes we stood in silence, gazing at the sea. But beneath that quiet, something restless began to stir. A feeling, a question, a truth that could no longer be hidden. I turned to him, my voice calm but trembling. "Why are we really here, Matthew?" He looked at me then, his green eyes sharp, calculating. "Mother," he said softly, "I wanted us to have one final peaceful day, before things change." My heart tightened. "Change?" He nodded, glancing briefly at Olivia. "You have held on to the company for too long. It is time to move forward. You are tired and you deserve peace. I have already spoken to the lawyers. Everything is ready." My breath caught. "You spoke to the lawyers?" He smiled faintly. "Do not look so alarmed. It is all in your best interest. Once you sign the transfer documents, you will be free. No more burdens, no more stress." His voice was smooth, rehearsed. It was not a conversation. It was a transaction. Olivia stepped closer, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Matthew is right, Evelyn. You have done so much for everyone, but holding on only makes it harder. This company, this estate, it should be in younger hands now." I turned toward her, studying her expression, her lips curved in a polite smile, her eyes sharp with hunger. "Young hands," I repeated quietly. "Or greedy ones." Her smile faltered, only for a second. Matthew's jaw tightened. "Mother, please, do not make this difficult. We are trying to help you." "Help me?" I whispered. "By taking away everything I built with your father?" He looked away, the mask of affection cracking for the first time. "Father built it," he said coldly, "but he also held us back. He chained us to his pride. You do the same. Olivia and I will not live our lives in your shadow." The words struck like knives. I had imagined cruelty, perhaps greed, but not this, not resentment. I took a step back, feeling the gravel shift beneath my feet. "Your father loved you. He wanted you to have more than he ever did." "Then he should have given it sooner," Matthew said sharply. The air grew colder. The mist thickened until the cliffs disappeared into white. Olivia reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "Here," she said. "The papers are ready. All you need to do is sign." She held them out to me, her gloved hands steady. I stared at them without moving. "And if I refuse?" She smiled. A thin, lifeless smile. "Then you will make this very painful for everyone." Matthew's gaze darkened. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Mother, please, do not make us do something we will regret." For a moment, the wind stopped. Time seemed to hold still. Then I saw it. The flicker in his eyes. Not hesitation, but resolve. He had already decided. I stepped backward, inch by inch, my pulse hammering in my ears. The cliff was only a few feet behind me now. The roar of the waves rose like a heartbeat. "Matthew," I said softly, "look at me. Whatever she has told you, whatever she has promised you, it is not worth this." He hesitated, but Olivia moved closer, whispering into his ear. Her words were too soft to hear, but I saw their effect. His face hardened. He took a slow step toward me. "Mother," he said gently, "you have always been stubborn. Please let me take care of you now." He reached for my hand. I did not move. "Take care of me, or take everything I have left." His fingers brushed mine, and then I saw it. A shadow flickered behind his eyes. A choice had been made. He pushed. The world tilted. The sky spun above me, a blur of white and gray. For a heartbeat, I felt the ground vanish beneath my feet, and then a sudden force yanked me backward. The pocket watch. It had caught on his sleeve chain as he pushed me. The chain snapped and we both fell, but not into the sea. We crashed onto the lower ledge of the cliff, the wind screaming around us. I felt pain shoot through my shoulder, but I was alive. Barely. Above me, I heard Olivia shouting, her voice frantic. "Matthew, what have you done?" He leaned over the edge, his face pale, eyes wide. "She is still alive!" Then as the mist closed around us, I heard his voice break. "Help me pull her up!" But Olivia did not move. Her tone was icy, deliberate. "No, Matthew, it is too late. If she lives, we lose everything." There was silence. Only the sound of the wind. Then his voice came again, trembling, torn. "I did not mean to." "Then finish it," Olivia hissed. "Finish what you started." I could not see them clearly through the mist, but I heard their steps, their voices fading as they argued. I tried to move, but pain shot through my arm. My vision blurred. And then, something else. A sound. Soft. Familiar. A whisper. "Do not let go, Evelyn." My heart froze. That voice, calm, steady, filled with warmth. It was Thomas. I turned my head, but there was no one there. Only the wind and the endless sea. "Do not let go," the voice said again. "Not yet. Not like this." Tears filled my eyes. My hand slipped from the rock, but somehow I felt strength where there should have been none. I reached upward, clawing at the ledge, my fingers scraping against the stone. Above, I heard footsteps running, fading, disappearing into the distance. They were leaving. I pulled myself upward, inch by inch, guided by a voice that no longer belonged to this world. "You promised me you would protect what we built," Thomas whispered. "Keep that promise, Evelyn. Stand." With one final burst of strength, I dragged myself over the ledge and collapsed on the cold ground. My hands were bleeding, my body trembled, but I was alive. The car was gone. The wind howled through the emptiness. And there, lying in the gravel beside me, was the broken pocket watch. Its face cracked, its hands still. But as I stared, I saw something impossible. The watch ticked once. Then again. Tick. Tick. As if the heartbeat of my husband had returned, if only for a moment, to keep me alive. I lay there for hours until the sound of distant engines reached me. A fisherman had seen the car earlier and called the police when he noticed the tire marks near the cliff edge. When they found me, I could barely speak. They lifted me gently, wrapping me in a blanket, asking what had happened. I said only one thing. They tried to kill me. Days later, I woke in a hospital bed. My arm was in a sling, my face bruised. The officer who came to see me said they had found the car abandoned near the docks. Matthew and Olivia were gone. But I knew they would not stay gone forever. People like them never disappear completely. They hide, they wait, they return. Yet I also knew something else. Something they could never take. Thomas's voice had saved me once, and I felt certain it would guide me again. "Do not let them destroy what we built," he had said. "You are stronger than you believe." And for the first time since his death, I believed him. The sea roared outside the window of my hospital room, the same sea that had almost claimed me. But instead of fear, I felt something else now. Clarity. The tide had not taken me. It had cleansed me. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet, "I am still here, Thomas, and I will finish what we began." The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. Pain came in waves like the sea that had nearly taken me. I lay in my hospital bed listening to the steady rhythm of the monitors, each beep reminding me that I was still alive, that I had survived something that was never meant to be survived. Detectives visited often. Their shoes squeaked softly on the polished floor as they asked questions, trying to piece together the truth from what I could recall. I told them everything: the drive to the cliffs, the argument, the fall. They took my statement carefully, writing every word as though each syllable mattered. When they left, the room would fall back into silence, broken only by the hum of the machines and the sound of the ocean through the window. Sometimes, when the wind grew stronger, it carried with it the faintest whisper, Thomas S. whisper, and I would close my eyes to listen. "You are not alone, Evelyn," it said. "You never were." 2 weeks later, the doctors allowed me to return home. My right arm remained bound in a sling, and each step I took sent a dull ache through my ribs, but I was determined. The first thing I saw when I stepped into my house was the portrait above the fireplace, Thomas S. photograph, smiling gently as though welcoming me back. I touched the frame with trembling fingers. "You were right," I whispered. "They showed their hearts for what they truly are." The house felt different. Not empty, but altered, as if it too had survived something. The flowers on the windowsill had withered, the curtains hung unevenly. Dust gathered on the piano that Thomas once played. For a while, I simply stood in the middle of the living room, unsure whether to cry or to pray. In the end, I did both. The next morning, an envelope arrived, pale blue, with my name written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Mrs. Caldwell, we have located Matthew and Olivia. They are currently in custody pending further investigation. We will require your presence to provide testimony at the hearing. Sincerely, Detective Alan Brewer." I read the words again and again until they blurred into each other. Relief did not come easily. There was a strange heaviness in knowing that my son, my only child, was sitting in a cell somewhere, waiting to face justice for what he had done. That night, I could not sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moon cast silver light over the garden. The pocket watch lay open in my lap. Its glass was cracked, its hands frozen in time. Still, it felt alive, pulsing faintly as if it carried a memory too deep for the human heart. "Do not let anger guide you," Thomas whispered from somewhere unseen. "Let truth speak for you." I nodded into the darkness. "I will, my love. I will speak the truth." The hearing took place in late autumn, when the air carried the scent of rain and fading leaves. I dressed simply, a dark coat, a silk scarf, and Thomas's watch pinned to my collar. As I entered the courthouse, the murmurs of strangers filled the hallways. Everyone seemed to know who I was, the mother who had been pushed from a cliff and lived to tell the tale. When they brought Matthew into the courtroom, I nearly stopped breathing. He looked thinner, older, his once confident face shadowed by guilt and sleeplessness. Olivia followed behind him, her gaze cold and distant, her hands trembling slightly as she sat beside her attorney. For a moment, Matthew's eyes met mine. Something flickered there. Shame, regret, fear. Then he looked away. The judge began the proceedings. The charges were read aloud: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. Each word struck like thunder, echoing across the room. I sat silently, my hands folded in my lap, listening as the lawyers recounted every detail: the financial manipulation, the planned transfer of property, the intent to make my death look like an accident. When my turn came to speak, I rose slowly. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. "I am not here to seek revenge," I said. "I am here to tell the truth. My son was not born evil, but greed, pride, and manipulation turned him into someone I could no longer recognize. I have already forgiven him in my heart. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means standing for what is right, even when it breaks you." A silence filled the room. The judge nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. The case stretched for weeks. In the end, justice came quietly, without celebration. Olivia received a lengthy sentence for conspiracy and fraud. Matthew, though spared the harshest punishment due to his eventual confession, was sentenced to several years in prison. When the verdict was read, he turned toward me. Tears streamed down his face. Mother, he whispered. I am sorry. I met his eyes. I know, I said softly. I just wish you had realized it before the edge. He bowed his head, and for the first time in many years, I saw the boy I once knew. Frightened, lost, and human again. After the trial, I returned to my home by the sea. The seasons changed quietly around me. Winter came with its silver frost, then melted into spring. With every sunrise, I felt a little stronger, a little lighter. I spent my mornings tending the garden, trimming the rose bushes that Thomas had planted decades ago. In the afternoons, I walked along the cliffs, not in fear, but in remembrance. The wind no longer frightened me. It carried whispers of resilience instead of loss. One afternoon, while I sat on the bench overlooking the ocean, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Mrs. Caldwell? I turned. It was Detective Brewer, holding his hat politely in both hands. I thought you might want to know, he said. Matthew has been doing well in the rehabilitation program. He writes letters to you every week, though he is not certain you receive them. I smiled faintly. I receive them, Detective. I just do not know how to answer them yet. He nodded gently. Take your time. Healing is not a race. When he left, I opened my handbag and took out a small bundle of envelopes. Matthew's letters, written in careful handwriting. Each began the same way. Dear Mother, I think of you every day. I read one quietly, tears blurring the words. He spoke of regret, of waking each morning haunted by the moment he had pushed me, of Olivia's manipulation, of the emptiness that followed her absence. He said he wanted to rebuild, if only from afar. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beneath the pocket watch in my bag. He will learn, Thomas's voice whispered in the wind. Pain teaches what love sometimes cannot. By summer, the house had begun to feel alive again. The roses bloomed deep red, the kind Thomas used to call heartfire. Children played along the beach below, their laughter mingling with the sound of gulls. I joined a small community group in town, widows, retired teachers, and women who had faced more storms than most could imagine. Every Sunday we gathered for coffee, laughter, and sometimes tears. One morning, as we sat beneath the oak tree outside the cafe, a woman named Grace said softly, Evelyn, you should share your story. It could help others. I smiled. Perhaps one day. For now, I am still living it. They all nodded, understanding that healing is a quiet thing, not a performance. That night, I returned home to the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. I sat by the fireplace and opened the pocket watch again. Though its face remained cracked, its hands had shifted slightly since the day I found it. They pointed now to the hour of my survival, the very moment I had heard Thomas S. voice telling me to hold on. I smiled through my tears. You kept your promise, I whispered. You stayed until I could stand again. Outside, thunder rolled gently over the sea, but I felt no fear. Only peace. Months turned into a year. Matthew was released on parole with strict conditions. He sent another letter, asking if he might visit. After several sleepless nights, I agreed. When he arrived, he looked older, quieter, the arrogance replaced by humility. He stood on my porch like a child seeking permission to come home. I did not expect you to forgive me, he said softly, but I needed to say it face to face. I am sorry for all of it. I looked at him for a long time. Then I stepped forward and placed my hand on his cheek. You cannot undo what has been done, but you can choose who you become next. Let that be my forgiveness. He broke down then, sobbing like the boy who once scraped his knees on the garden path and came running to me. In that moment, something within both of us healed. Not completely, but enough. After he left, I walked once more to the cliffs. The sea shimmered beneath the afternoon sun, endless and alive. I held the pocket watch in my palm, letting the light dance across its cracked glass. "We made it, Thomas," I said softly. Our story did not end with a fall. It began again with forgiveness. A gust of wind lifted my hair, carrying the faintest echo of his laughter. I smiled and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me to pretend I was dead, so I could learn how to live again." Then I turned away from the edge and began walking home. The path was steep, but the air was warm. And for the first time in many years, I felt alive in every step. Love without respect is like a house built on sand. It may stand for a while, but the first storm will show what truly lies beneath. I spent most of my life giving, my time, my heart, my trust, believing that love alone could hold a family together. But I have learned that love, when unbalanced, becomes weakness. True love requires boundaries, honesty, and courage. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting the pain. It means remembering it without letting it poison your soul. Sometimes the people we raise to love us will hurt us in ways we never imagined. Yet even then, life whispers a second chance, not to change the past, but to rise above it. So live with grace, not bitterness, because peace is not found in revenge, it is found in survival. If my story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Grandma Fables. Every story here carries a piece of truth, and perhaps the lesson someone you love needs to hear today.